So we just saw a good scrap for the British and Commonwealth heavyweight titles between Fabio Wardley and Frazer Clarke, which ended in a split decision draw. Now, first off, I have to say I've got no problem with the result. It was a very, very close fight, very keenly contested. The only point of contention was a point deduction from Frazer Clarke for a low blow, which, watching it live, seemed very harsh. But according to the Sky punditry team, Steve Gray, the referee, says that he actually warned Frazer Clarke several times for previous low blows prior to deducting that point. And if that's the case, then I've got no issue with the point deduction either. So let's talk about the fight. Well, early on, Frazer Clarke was getting the better of it. And it was similar to what we saw in the Nathan Gorman fight, where you had the better schooled boxer, which is what Frazer Clarke is, having his way with the jab, going upstairs and downstairs, and just being more accurate and more precise. And that comes from years and years of amateur experience. He's got the technique on his side. So yeah, there was definitely similarities early doors between the Gorman fight and this fight with Frazer Clarke and Fabio Wardley. Clarke managed to bust Wardley's nose bridge, and that's been an injury that keeps reoccurring. It's never properly healed. If you see Fabio Wardley in interviews, he's always got that scar tissue on the bridge of his nose. You might actually want to get that looked at and maybe look at having, I don't know, plastic surgery or something. I know there's stuff that they can put under your skin to stop it from breaking again. But anyway, Clarke was getting the better of it the first couple rounds with the nice boxing. But then, as expected, Fabio Wardley did what he does, which is go into Super Saiyan mode when he's getting outboxed, and he just imposes himself on his opponent. He opens up completely. Reckless abandon. And so he did that a few times early in the fight, but Frazer Clarke was able to withstand it. Despite being the better schooled fighter, the better technical fighter, Clarke is more one-paced. He doesn't have that injection of energy that Fabio Wardley has. Nevertheless, he was still managing to come through those rocky moments. But then a few rounds later, when things were going quite nice for Frazer Clarke, he gets dropped. Fabio Wardley commits to an attack, goes all out, doesn't stop punching until first he has Frazer Clarke genuinely reeling, and then keeps going until he drops him to the canvas. I don't think Frazer Clarke was massively hurt, but it obviously was a perfectly legitimate knockdown. But his eyes were clear, he wasn't out of it or anything like that. I thought that Frazer Clarke was a bit despondent after getting dropped. It was towards the end of one of the rounds, and he came out for the next round, and his body language seemed really dejected. It was an interesting contrast of personalities in there, because Wardley's the kind of guy who doesn't really get going until you sting him or hurt him with a shot. Whereas Frazer Clarke is the opposite. When you sting him or hurt him, or in this case drop him, he goes the other way. He gets dejected, he goes a bit down. And it took several rounds for Frazer Clarke to really get his head together after that knockdown. I'm not talking about dealing with the concussive effects of the punch. I just mean psychologically. But he eventually did, and down the home stretch, both guys were desperately tired, but Frazer Clarke's shape held together better. And by shape, I'm talking about his boxing construct, not his stamina. Both guys were absolutely shattered. And in fact, Frazer Clarke hid his fatigue very well. Better than Wardley, I would say, and that also comes from the lots and lots of amateur experience he has, fighting in the WSB and so on. Because if you looked at the 10th, 11th, and 12th rounds, you'd probably get the impression that Fabio Wardley was actually the more tired of the two. But at the conclusion of the 12th, Frazer Clarke was so exhausted that he literally collapsed to the canvas. Whereas Fabio Wardley stayed on his feet with his arms aloft. Frazer Clarke was sat down on the canvas. He had to be helped up onto a stool. That's how tired he was. One of the things I noticed during the fight, apart from Frazer Clarke having the more reliable jab and being the more accurate puncher, he kept his shape better. But also I think he'd studied, well, you would assume, but it looked like he'd studied Fabio Wardley's moves, because a lot of the time when Wardley attacks, he'll make a defensive move where he dips forward to avoid the counters. And when he did that in this fight, Frazer Clarke had an uppercut waiting for him. So I'm pretty sure he and his trainer, Angel Fernandez, would have noticed that Wardley does that and drilled this uppercut move. But credit to Fabio Wardley, he showed a great chin. Not that Frazer Clarke is a massive puncher, but he's a very big man. And if he hits you clean on the chops, it's definitely not going to tickle. And he hit Fabio Wardley clean plenty of times in this fight, and there was never an occasion where Wardley looked seriously hurt at all. So he's definitely got a chin on him. Even more impressive when you consider how tired Fabio Wardley was. Now, Wardley's face was an absolute mess. by, I want to say, midway through the fight, that old injury on the bridge of his nose reopened and it was bleeding profusely. At one point, it was so bad, the bleeding, that it looked like Wardley's nose had been cut off. Like it didn't have a nose. It was crazy. And in addition to the injury to his nose, he also started developing some bruising under his right eye. And of course, Frazer Clarke, as any good pro should, kept targeting Fabio Wardley's injuries. Wardley really showed his technical limitations in this fight, and it's not the first time. They were on display against Nathan Gorman. They were on display even against Eric Molina. He really relies on this Super Saiyan mode that he goes into to punch through the construct of the more skilled opponent. But as I've said many times in the past, he's not going to be able to rely on that forever. And he nearly came unstuck in this fight. If it weren't for that point deduction, then Fabio Wardley would have lost this fight. And Frazer Clarke has to be kicking himself for allowing that to happen. In fact, I'd say neither guy looked like they were anywhere near ready for world level based on that performance. Not dissing either one of them. I'm just saying they both looked very green. Now, for Fabio Wardley, I think that's not so much of an issue because he's the younger man. He's still in his 20s. For Frazer Clarke, it is more of an issue because he's been boxing for so long. Well over 100 amateur fights, WSB, and so on. And for him to look so far off world level, yeah, that's problematic. Whereas with Fabio Wardley, he's got the mentality for world level. That's one thing I can say about him. He may not have the technique for it, but he's definitely got the mentality for it. He's got the toughness for it. Whereas with Frazer Clarke, yeah, he's got better technique than Wardley, but his technique don't look world level to me. And neither does his mentality. He's not as gritty, he's not as fierce as Fabio Wardley. So anyway, regardless of the limitations both guys showed, it was a very entertaining scrap, a very competitive scrap. Ended in a split decision draw. I can't argue with it. They'll probably do a rematch, and that's probably the best thing for them at this stage, to be honest, because I don't think either one of them is ready to go to the next level yet. So you might as well fight each other again. I think the public will like it. And in fact, Sky did a poll all the way through of fan scorecards. And at the end of the fight, the fans had it a draw. So the fans can't argue too much with the result or at all, because at least when it comes to the Sky audience, they agreed with the judges. So a good domestic scrap at heavyweight for the British and Commonwealth titles. Both guys should learn and grow from that as long as there's no lasting damage. Hopefully there isn't. And they can mix it up again, I don't know, 6 months down the line. I said before the fight that I was actually tempted to pick Frazer Clarke to win this one, but I didn't because, for one, Fabio Wardley's proven me wrong a couple times in the past, and for two, Frazer Clarke looked nervous to me at the weigh-in and on the press conferences during fight week. And I wasn't sure how he would handle those nerves. Yes, he's got all this experience in the amateurs and whatever, but the pressure in the pro game is different because there's so much more media attention, so much more public attention. But Frazer Clarke handled all that absolutely fine, because when it comes to nerves, it can go one of two ways. A fighter can either channel the nerves to make themselves more sharp, or it can make them hesitant. With Frazer Clarke, it was definitely the former. It made him more sharp. He was boxing nice early on. Nothing spectacular, but, just good, solid fundamentals, sticking a jab in Wardley's face. So he at least passed that test as far as I'm concerned, being able to channel his nerves in the right way. Now with Fabio Wardley, he didn't really pass any other test in this fight that he hasn't passed before, other than maybe the stamina to be able to go 12 rounds. I mean, he was dog tired, but he pushed himself through. The other things he showed, we already knew that about Fabio Wardley. We know that when you hit him with some good shots, he's going to come roaring back. We know he can take a shot. We know he's mentally tough. We know he handles big occasions well, but now he can push himself through a tough 12-rounder as well. So yeah, all in all, enjoyable. Let me know what you guys think about it, how you felt about the fight in the comment section below. Are you sick and tired of the mainstream mindset? Does the dogmatic conformity and pathological ignorance have you tearing your hair out in frustration? Then don't be alone. Come and join our brotherhood on Patreon. We stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. You'll gain access to my weekly topical podcast where we take more deep dives than Jacques Cousteau on an endless variety of subjects. There's also videos, interviews, live Q&As, as well as a vast back catalogue of previous episodes, including my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. You can listen via the Patreon app or download in high-quality MP3. Connect with myself and hundreds of other members in our Element chat group. There's no contract, no commitment, you can cancel at any time, and it's cheaper than a Mickey D's McMuffin. Just head to my Patreon page via the link below this video and select the tier called the Brotherhood of Reason. I'll see you over there.